In Philippians 4, verses 1 through 9, Paul says, "Therefore, my brothers, whom I love and long for, my joy and my crown, stand firm thus in the Lord, my beloved. I entreat Euodia and I entreat Syntyche to agree in the Lord. Yes, I ask you also, true companion, help these women who have labored side by side with me in the gospel, together with Clement and the rest of my fellow workers, whose names are in the book of life. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again I will say rejoice. Let your reasonableness be known to everyone. The Lord is at hand. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. What you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, practice these things, and the God of peace will be with you." So Paul has just finished explaining to the Philippians that their citizenship is in heaven and not on earth. So in light of that citizenship, he tells them to stand firm in the Lord. Specifically, he means to stand firm by maintaining the unity of the Spirit. In verses 2 and 3, he addresses two women, Euodia and Syntyche, to agree in the Lord. Unity is very important and close to the heart of the Apostle Paul. He is very aware that one simple argument amongst believers, if not resolved quickly, can have the power to divide an entire church. We are stronger when we are unified together. Paul calls us to unity in Ephesians 4, verses 3. Maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace, he says. And in 1 Peter, finally, all of you have unity of mind. He knew the power of unity, and therefore he knew the power of disunity. Another thing to notice is that the Apostle Paul is asking the church to come together and to help with the mending of the relationship. An argument can involve a whole church, and Paul is asking that the mending requires the entire church as well. Lastly, Paul mentions that their names are written in the book of life. He's asking them to take a step back, look at the problem from a different perspective. He does not want them to focus on themselves or even to admit that everything is their fault. No, what he wants them to do is look at what they have in common. No matter what their argument, no matter how great or how petty it is, they have in common their very salvation. They have in common that they are loved by God and called to eternity with Him. They have in common that they were paid for with a price, and they have in common that they are called to preach the gospel and called to a life dependent on Christ. Paul is asking them to look at these things, realizing that their commonalities are eternally more important than any difference that they could ever have. He is asking them to look outside of themselves and to look at the benefits of belonging to Christ. If these two women who labored side by side with the greatest evangelist who ever lived and who were involved with the beginning of the church, if they can be divided, I think we can all agree that the modern church is not above division, and that we too are susceptible to losing the unity that is so important to the Apostle Paul and so important for our very growth in the Lord. Paul knows that it is impossible to avoid conflict, so it's necessary that we learn to work through conflict. So how can we maintain unity? And Paul is very kind to answer that in the rest of the verses. He says, to rejoice in the Lord always. Again I say rejoice. We resolve conflict by acting as Christians. And the first way we can do that is rejoicing in the Lord. In this life, rejoicing is not natural for anybody. It must be practiced, hence why it is a command. And it must be practiced more than anything in the midst of conflict. I'm not sure about you, but when other Christians gossip about me, judge me, or treat me poorly in any way, my first thought is not to rejoice. Naturally, I would be hurt, which would turn into anger, which would cause me to want to retaliate, to do to them what they have done to me. But the Apostle Paul says, no, what will you accomplish by retaliation? For if you love those who love you, are you not acting as even the Gentiles do? Retaliation causes division. Rejoice, says the Apostle Paul. Our rejoicing, however, is not rejoicing in earthly things. We do not rejoice that our brother has sinned against us. We rejoice in the Lord, for it is where our strength comes from. It pours out of our rejoicing in Christ. We are called to rejoice always, but especially in times when it is the most difficult, when things are hard, when we are facing hurt from brothers who we trusted to not hurt us. Rejoice especially in these times. Set your mind on the Lord and let His goodness instead of focusing on your pain or anger towards a person. We resolve conflict by yielding our rights. The next verses say, "Let your reasonableness be known to everyone. The Lord is at hand." The word reasonableness can be translated yielding spirit or gentleness. It seems to imply that we are to yield our rights to our brothers in the midst of conflict. When facing conflicts of many kinds, it's natural for us to think about our rights, to meditate on how unfair the situation is, but we're called to give up our rights as Christians, and that means in conflict. We do not retaliate, but respond in gentleness, and we respond in humility. As Christ gave up His rights as He came to earth and died, so we are to give up our rights. We respond in forgiveness, even when the world tells us that we have a right to be angry and a right to be hurt, and even a right to retaliate. We give up those rights when we come to the cross, because of Jesus who forgave us in spite of our sinfulness. And we do this because the Lord is at hand. This can either mean that the Lord is near in proximity or that His return is near. Either way, we're to let our yielded spirit be known to all people. He knows both parties intimately, and He knows our hearts. So be yielded to one another. He comes soon, and do we want to be involved in an earthly argument when Jesus returns? Probably not. One point of motivation to maintain unity is that the Lord is near to us.